The ancient history that World War II has become, in fact, impacts us every day.
Just another World War II story filled with thrills, spills, and action and adventure. That would have been very easy for me.
You think you know the horror of D-Day from watching Saving Private Ryan? But the real battle was happening behind Steven Spielberg's cameras as he tried to capture the nightmare his own father had lived through. Tom Hanks, Tom Sizemore, and a squad of young actors weren't just playing soldiers. They were being broken down and rebuilt through military hell that left psychological scars as real as any war wound. What you're about to discover will shock you. A director so obsessed with honoring veterans that he created trauma on his own set. Actors who suffered genuine PTSD symptoms from the brutal production. And 27 minutes of Omaha Beach carnage that took 2 years to plan and forever changed how war could be shown on screen. The bullets were fake, but the blood, fear, and dedication were devastatingly real. Steven Spielberg, director. Let's start with Steven Spielberg himself, whose decision to direct Saving Private Ryan came from the most personal place in his career. Guilt over his own father's World War II service and a desperate need to honor a generation that was rapidly disappearing. But what most people don't realize is that Spielberg's approach to this film was shaped by decades of feeling inadequate compared to his father's wartime sacrifice. Spielberg's father, Arnold, had served as a radio operator in the Army Air Corps during World War II, flying combat missions over Burma and India. Throughout Spielberg's childhood, Arnold rarely spoke about his experiences, maintaining the stoic silence typical of his generation. This silence haunted Spielberg, creating a psychological gap between father and son that decades of filmmaking success couldn't bridge. When Spielberg won the Oscar for Schindler's List, depicting the Holocaust his relatives had survived, he realized he had never properly honored his own father's war. The most shocking revelation about Spielberg's preparation was his 2-year obsession with planning the 27-minute Omaha Beach sequence. He watched every piece of D-Day footage available, read hundreds of veteran accounts, and consulted with military historians until he could visualize the invasion in his sleep. But the research took a psychological toll. Spielberg began having nightmares about the landing, experiencing what therapists later suggested might be secondary PTSD from absorbing so many traumatic accounts. But here's what stunned his crew. Spielberg's direction during the Omaha Beach sequence was unlike anything he had done before. The director, known for technical perfection and meticulous shot planning, became almost manic, running through the controlled chaos with a handheld camera, screaming directions over simulated explosions. Cast members reported that Spielberg seemed possessed during these scenes, as if he was trying to channel every story his father had never told him. The emotional weight of the project caused Spielberg to have a breakdown during production that was kept secret from most of the cast. After filming the Omaha Beach sequence, Spielberg spent an entire day alone, unable to speak to anyone, processing the weight of what he had created and questioning whether depicting such carnage honored or exploited the men who had actually lived through it. Tom Hanks, Captain John Miller. Tom Hanks's transformation into Captain John Miller was one of Hollywood's most dramatic departures from an actor's established persona, but the secrets behind his preparation reveal a performer who understood that playing a war hero required him to show weakness rather than strength. Hanks didn't just play a company commander, he embodied the physical and psychological deterioration of a man pushed beyond human limits. Hanks's most profound preparation involved abandoning everything audiences associated with his likable everyman persona. At Spielberg's direction, he studied World War II officers who had led men through the European campaign, discovering that successful commanders weren't fearless warriors, but rather ordinary men struggling to maintain composure while watching their soldiers die. This research fundamentally changed Hanks's understanding of military leadership and heroism. The most revealing aspect of Hanks's performance was Captain Miller's shaking hand, a physical symptom that became the character's defining trait. But here's what most viewers never understood. The tremor wasn't just a nervous habit. It represented Miller's suppressed psychological breakdown. Hanks researched combat stress reactions and discovered that many World War II officers developed similar physical manifestations of PTSD, small cracks in their composure that revealed the psychological pressure threatening to destroy them. But the most shocking secret was Hanks's emotional preparation for Miller's death scene. He spent weeks contemplating mortality, reading soldiers' final letters, and trying to understand the psychology of men who knew they were dying on foreign soil. The famous "earn this" line was delivered with such genuine weight because Hanks had spent months grappling with what sacrifice actually meant, and whether any cause justified the cost he was portraying. Tom Sizemore, Sergeant Horvath. Tom Sizemore's portrayal of Sergeant Horvath carried secrets that went far beyond his performance. He was battling severe addiction issues during production, and his personal struggle with demons became inseparable from his character's war-weary authority. Sizemore didn't just play a veteran sergeant. He channeled his own survival instincts while fighting to keep his career and life from collapsing. Sizemore's casting was itself a gamble that shocked industry insiders. Spielberg knew about Sizemore's substance abuse problems, but believed his raw intensity and working-class authenticity were essential for Horvath. The director essentially bet his production on Sizemore's ability to stay clean during filming, a risk that created enormous pressure on an actor already struggling with personal demons. The most surprising aspect of Sizemore's preparation was his extensive research into World War II non-commissioned officers, the sergeants who were the real backbone of military units. Sizemore discovered that these men often carried more psychological weight than their officers, responsible for keeping young soldiers alive while maintaining the facade of invulnerability. He studied how real sergeants spoke, moved, and led, creating a character whose authority came from competence rather than rank. But here's what shocked the younger cast members. Sizemore's intensity wasn't just acting. His personal battles with addiction had taught him about survival, about maintaining composure while internally falling apart, lessons that translated directly into Horvath's character. The sergeant's world-weary wisdom and protective instincts came from Sizemore's own understanding of how to function while carrying unbearable weight. Sizemore's mentorship of younger actors became one of the production's hidden dynamics. Between takes, he would share stories about maintaining focus under pressure, lessons ostensibly about combat, but really about his own struggles with addiction and professional survival. Matt Damon and other young actors later said that Sizemore's guidance helped them understand not just their characters, but the reality of being tested beyond normal human limits. Edward Burns, Barry Pepper, and Giovanni Ribisi, the supporting squad members in Saving Private Ryan, weren't just background soldiers. They were carefully crafted characters whose actors brought personal depth and historical research that transformed them into authentic representatives of America's diverse fighting force. But the secrets behind their preparation reveal actors who underwent psychological and physical transformations that left lasting impacts on their lives and careers. Edward Burns' portrayal of Private Reiben, the cynical Brooklyn soldier, came from his own working-class New York roots and his understanding of the men who fought World War II from tenement neighborhoods. Burns researched his own family history, discovering relatives who had served in the war and used their stories to inform Reiben's skeptical, street-smart perspective. The most shocking aspect of his preparation was Burns' insistence on maintaining his Brooklyn accent and attitude, even when Spielberg suggested softening it, arguing that authenticity mattered more than likability. Barry Pepper's transformation into Private Jackson, the religious sniper, required him to reconcile his own spiritual beliefs with the moral complexity of killing. Pepper spent months studying Christian soldiers who had struggled with the contradiction between their faith and their duty to kill. He discovered accounts of soldiers who prayed before shooting enemy combatants, creating a psychological framework that informed Jackson's haunting combination of devotion and violence. The most disturbing revelation was Pepper's discovery that many religious soldiers experienced profound spiritual crises after the war, unable to reconcile their wartime actions with their beliefs. Giovanni Ribisi's preparation for Medic Wade was perhaps the most emotionally devastating. Ribisi trained with actual combat medics and emergency room doctors, learning not just medical procedures but the psychological toll of trying to save lives in impossible conditions. He studied accounts of World War II medics who suffered tremendous guilt over soldiers they couldn't save, understanding that Wade's compassion would ultimately become his greatest vulnerability. The most shocking aspect was Ribisi's method approach to Wade's death scene. He spent days contemplating his own mortality and the experience of dying slowly while surrounded by helpless friends. The squad's bonding during Captain Dale Dye's brutal boot camp became genuine brotherhood that translated directly to screen chemistry. These actors suffered together, slept in muddy foxholes together, and learned to depend on each other for survival in simulated combat conditions that felt terrifyingly real. Matt Damon, Private James Ryan. Matt Damon's casting as Private James Ryan came at a pivotal moment in his career, just after Good Will Hunting had made him a star. But the secrets behind his preparation reveal an actor grappling with the moral weight of playing someone whose rescue cost the lives of better men. Damon didn't just play the title character. He embodied the survivor's guilt that would haunt an entire generation of veterans. Damon's most profound challenge was understanding why his character deserved to be saved when so many others weren't. He spent weeks researching actual sole survivor cases from World War II, discovering the Army's policy of removing the last surviving sons from combat zones after family tragedies. These real stories revealed the bureaucratic thinking behind the mission, but also the genuine human impulse to spare families from total loss. The most shocking revelation about Damon's preparation was his discovery that many sole survivors felt tremendous guilt about their rescue, believing they were no more deserving than thousands of other soldiers who died. This psychological burden became central to Damon's portrayal, informing Ryan's reluctance to leave his unit and his lifetime struggle with whether he had earned his survival. But here's what stunned Spielberg. Damon's farm boy authenticity came from intensive research into Midwestern rural culture during the 1940s. Damon spent time in Iowa studying agricultural communities, learning how young men from small farming towns experienced the war differently than their urban counterparts. He discovered that rural soldiers often had stronger connections to their units because military service represented their first experience away from isolated farm communities. Captain Dale Dye's boot camp. The transformation of Hollywood actors into convincing soldiers happened in a brutal military boot camp that became legendary in the industry. But the secrets of what really happened during those weeks revealed training so intense that several cast members later said it was the hardest experience of their lives. Captain Dale Dye, a decorated Marine veteran, wasn't preparing actors for a movie. He was attempting to give them a genuine taste of military suffering. Dye's most controversial method was sleep deprivation, limiting actors to just a few hours of rest each night while conducting training exercises in all weather conditions. The cast was awakened with simulated artillery explosions, forced to conduct night marches through muddy terrain, and subjected to psychological pressure designed to break down their civilian identities. Tom Hanks later said the exhaustion was so complete that he genuinely began to resent Dye, exactly the relationship a soldier might have with a demanding superior. The most shocking aspect of the training was the use of live ammunition during certain exercises. While safety protocols were strictly maintained, the psychological impact of hearing real bullets and explosions around them gave actors a visceral understanding of combat that no acting class could provide. Several cast members reported genuine fear during these exercises, experiencing adrenaline responses that helped them access authentic combat emotions during filming. But here's what the studio tried to keep quiet. Several actors suffered injuries during boot camp that required medical treatment. Sprained ankles, hypothermia from sleeping in wet conditions, and minor wounds from equipment became common. The production had to employ additional medical staff just to keep the cast functional, and there were serious discussions about whether Dye's methods were too dangerous for insured actors. The Omaha Beach Revolution. The 27-minute Omaha Beach sequence that opened Saving Private Ryan wasn't just a technical achievement. It was a complete revolution in how war could be depicted on screen, and the secrets behind its creation reveal Spielberg's obsession with capturing the sensory overload and chaos that no previous war film had dared to show. Spielberg's most radical innovation was his decision to shoot the sequence like a documentary rather than a traditional action scene. He used handheld cameras, removed the Steadicam stabilizing mechanisms to create jarring movements, and instructed cinematographer Janusz Kaminski to desaturate the color to match faded World War II footage. The result was visceral immediacy that made audiences feel like they were actually on the beach rather than watching a movie. The technical preparation for the sequence took 2 years and involved innovations that had never been attempted before. Spielberg and his team developed new squib systems that created more realistic bullet wounds, designed practical effects for dismemberment and traumatic injuries, and coordinated over 1,000 extras in precisely choreographed chaos that